So one of the hot topics in shooting is whether to shoot off a hop or whether to shoot off a step-in. And one of the things that I think is ignored when we speak about this is the importance of strength to shooting, especially when shooting off the hop. So one of the reasons, if you watch, great NBA players who shoot off the hop and shoot off the hop well, players, Curry when he uses it, somebody like Ray Allen, one of the things that you notice is because they use the hop, they have a much smaller flexion at their knees and their hips. So they derive much of their power, much of the force that they impart on the ball, they get from being elastic or from just the bounce off the ground, from the landing, from the jump, the stretch shortening cycle. They just kind of react off the ground, or they bounce off the ground, and they use that reactive strength, and that's where they derive the power for their ball. The problem is having that type of elasticity or reactive strength requires strength. And a lot of youth players simply lack that type of strength. So I know during my dissertation, I tested a number of college students and high school girls basketball players, and one of my measures was reactive strength. So I did a drop jump off a 30-centimeter box, and any time, ground contact time that was greater than, I believe, 200 milliseconds, ruled them out. There's kind of a dividing line there, somewhere between 200 and 300 milliseconds, depending on which study you're using, that below that is termed reactive strength, and above that is termed power. And so very few of the students and the high school players were able to use a ground contact time of less than 200 milliseconds. Now, of course, that was falling off a 30-centimeter box, and it's a little bit different if you're just taking a small jump stop or small hop into your shot. So, you can extend the number of athletes that would be able to accomplish a quick ground contact force or ground contact time, because of the reduced distance on the hop. But still, the strength is there. You have to be able to resist the force of dropping onto the ground and the deformation at the knees and the hips. And we know, especially in girls basketball, that can be a problem because we see a lot of knee valgus when players land, and that's kind of one sign that they're collapsing in, and so they're going to have a longer ground contact time as the knees bend in and then come back out to jump, and they're just that's just a sign that they're unable to kind of resist that force. So in youth players, sometimes I think shooting off a 1-2 step may be appropriate, even if we decide that shooting off a hop is appropriate for, say, high school and beyond, because it's quicker, or because we can use that elasticity and it's using less muscle force to shoot the ball. But at younger ages, I think maybe we need to use that muscle force because we don't have the same type of elasticity developed to be able to use that and to shoot with enough force by relying more on the passive structures. So again, I think this is ignored in the conversation, and we just assume that because an NBA player shoots off a hop and with very little bend at the knees and the hips, that's the proper way to shoot, and that we can transfer that technique down to a young player. And while that may be the best way to shoot, the ability to transfer that technique to a young player isn't guaranteed, because it's a different player, different levels of strength, different body types, limb lengths, etc. That player may not be able to handle those forces and still be able to coordinate the subsequent movement. So it's one thing to be able to decelerate without a lot of bend at the knees and hips, but then it's another thing to be able to decelerate, but also use that deceleration to generate force and upward force and coordinate the movement of shooting a basketball, which becomes a much more complex task than just landing, or just landing for a depth jump. So Again, when we're talking about whether or not to hop or to step in, I think this needs to be part of the conversation. Is, do the players have the requisite amount of strength, and do they have the requisite reactive strength to be able to use the hop effectively and efficiently to power their shot? Can they shoot with reactivity or elasticity powering their shot, or do they need to use more active measures or active structures, the muscle system, to generate the power, and so they need a greater flexion at their knees and their hips to generate the power to shoot the ball. This is something that, again, it's going to be different for every player. Even at youth levels, there's probably some players that are going to be able to manage shooting with some elasticity and reactivity and shooting off a hop and generating enough power. But there's going to be some players that probably won't. And to try to teach just one thing because it's what an NBA player does without kind of recognizing the difference in strength levels and the amount of reactive strength necessary to shoot the basketball, I think misses the point and misguides some of our instruction. So, to be able to use shooting off the hop and rely more on the passive structures and the elasticity, we need to have that reactive strength. And certainly not all young players have that. And it's something that needs to be developed before we move and incorporate it into the skill of shooting.